Good evening and thank you for this opportunity. When Sundar and Srini first reached out to me and wanted me to participate in this event, I was a little surprised as to why I was chosen. So probably about 30 minutes back, Srini revealed the reason for it, the roll of dice. I'm actually very happy to be a part of this event, largely because this is something that a few of us do for a living as part of Catlings. We have a slightly different model relative to what CFO Bridge has. We aren't as diverse as the leadership talent that you actually saw on stage a few minutes back. We have about 10 partners. All of us are ex-Cognizant. 9 of us are in Chennai and 1 in UK. So that's how diverse we could probably get with our team. Often when we go to meetings, people ask us, hey, you seem to have a very homogeneous experience. We look at each other and say that the only diversity that we bring to the table is one is bald, one is obese, one is so on and so forth. I'll probably go ahead and then share some of the thoughts that I have. A few of those points have already been covered by Srini and others who are up on stage here. So I'll try and then keep this at a fairly high level. So when I look back and look at some of the structural changes that have happened in the history of management, a few things crop up. One, several decades back, people looked at strategy and management to be two sides of the same coin. A few years later, operations started playing a very, very important role, almost to a point that management and operations became two sides of the same coin, which is when most of the interesting frameworks came about in the marketplace, whether it's Six Sigma, whether it's Kaizen, so on and so forth. And a few years later, management and operations and technology became two sides of the same coin, which is when many of the strategy and management consulting companies started making significant investments in technology because they realized that they just couldn't probably go and provide a strategic blueprint to an organization without an understanding of what technology can do to the company in the short to the long term. You actually saw some massive build out of technology capabilities in some of these large consulting companies. If you look at Deloitte in India as an example, the kind of rapidity with which they are scaling up the technology talent, almost doubling their technology talent with every 2 or 3 years, it's unimaginable. But today, I think a few of these topics were covered, but let me provide some insights to it. A few additional aspects have been added to core management. One clearly is ESG, the other is human sciences. In fact, just before we got into this room, I know there's going to be a very interesting panel a few minutes from now. Much of the conversation with the panelists was all about how do we manage the human dynamics across multiple generations today in the workforce. I think the pandemic was a true eye-opener. If you just look at what happened during the pandemic in discovering a vaccine, manufacturing the vaccine, and administrating the vaccine, this played out exceptionally well. I know most of you know that in the pharma world, it takes anywhere between 8 and 10 years to develop a drug, and you have a window of about 5 years to monetize, to go through the commercial operations of the drug before it goes off patent. Anything that takes 10 years was crunched in less than about a year to manufacture the drug. 2, we manufacture drugs in volumes never done before historically. We were able to distribute, manage the entire supply chain and logistics to the nook and corner of the world so that every individual is jabbed. But where did we fail? We failed when it came to vaccine hesitancy, in terms of vaccine wastage. On all aspects that drove vaccine hesitancy had nothing to do with management thinking or theory in the prior decades. It had to do with politics, sociology, ecology, anthropology, so on and so forth. So increasingly, we are beginning to see human behavior gaining center stage in management theories, and we are going to see more and more of these. Having lived the last 30 plus years in the technology industry, I cannot but sometimes wonder, why is it that people are finding it difficult to get employees back to office? Fine, we've all been part of organizations of various sizes at various points in time. Today, HR professionals are finding it difficult. The leadership is finding it difficult to call employees back to office. The fear if they call them back to office, they would quit. They may not be able to attract the right profiles of people if you don't give them the kind of a hybrid working environment, so on and so forth. I think some of the fundamental aspects of running a business are going to be tested if you don't get the human sciences part of our business right. I was pleasantly surprised when Srini announced that next year you may probably have a CHRO bridge. And let me give you, given you saw in my profile, I spent a lot of time with the academia. And there are reasons for it, specifically in the Indian context. If I were to ask all of you in this room to name the top 10 law schools in India, chances are that 99% of you would get all the top 10 right. If I were to ask you to name the top 10 medical colleges, you would do it. Top 10 engineering colleges, you would do it. Can we try and then go beyond the top 3 HR institutions in the country? We have a fundamental problem with talent generation in HR in a meaningful fashion. You have a Tata Institute of Social Sciences, probably have an XLRI, you have a symbiosis, and then there is a free fall. And I have studied this very carefully, merely looking at the salaries of educational institutions that offer a master's in HR. You probably start anywhere between 25 and 30 with the premium institutions. Very quickly, you actually drop to 5 to 7. And as a nation, we haven't invested in human resources at higher education level, which is probably the reason many of you are in the tech industry, right? Having spent considerable years with some of the large technology firms, at times I have actually scratched my head when the CFO becomes a CHRO of a company. The top 3 companies have experimented with this in tech, where people running delivery centers have become HR heads, people who have been CFOs have become HR heads, and people from different departments have become HR heads. Just imagine if the chief marketing officer becomes a CFO of a company. Fine, we do have a genuine problem, and that's going to play out in the months and years to come. I won't spend too much time on this. Why is it that we truly need fractional CXOs today? One, it's largely because the complexity of running any organization has increased manifold. No longer are capabilities homogeneous. A few minutes back, Srini mentioned that they actually have brought 2 CFOs together to complement their skills to work in a given account. No longer is a CFO complete in terms of capabilities as an individual. You probably need complementary CFOs to make a CFO complete. And that's the challenge that we are going to probably face. One, smaller companies, given that I work with several of them with under 10 million, 20 million, 50 million in annual revenue, what we have realized is if only we are able to provide them that strategic guidance up front, you shift left. The earlier in the process, if we are able to build the right muscles in the organization, the opportunity for them to grow with grace gets multiplied manifold. When you discover some of these challenges down the line, you have some serious issues. Fine, and we saw that play out yesterday in this company called II, right? Fine, exceptionally well-managed company. People thought that they would potentially be a threat to some of the well-established global players in that space. Byju's, it's a company that came up with a great degree of promise. But there are certain elements, certain parameters, if only they had focused on those and governed well, we could have produced one of the finest unicorns that the world would be proud of. These are all organizations with great energy, great hunger, great promise, but they falter along the way largely because they haven't got that advisory support at the right time. Specialized expertise. Expertise is no longer just limited at a 30,000 feet level. You actually have to work at a 3 feet level today. I'll give you a couple of examples based on a study that I was fortunate to participate in last year as part of my association with Kriya University. Flexibility people spoke about. Interim solutions. Now this is going to probably become a much bigger issue in the months and years to come. Having lived in Chennai for the best part of my life, we were all aghast in Chennai, talking in many chambers of commerce, when there is one promising company that saw 4 CFOs in 5 years. Discontinuities are going to be a reality in the days and months to come. I wouldn't be surprised if we probably see 3 CEOs in a company in 1 year. So interim solutions have clearly become a need for many of the organizations, and I can tell you, end-user organizations are finding it very difficult to attract very good technology talent as a CIO. And especially smaller companies. Just imagine the pressure that the Reserve Bank of India is putting on smaller financial institutions in the country, where every week they are actually getting a directive from the central agency on the changes that they need to the technology landscape. And imagine if DPDP were to become a reality a few months down the line post this election. I think it's going to be a free-for-all. Fine, understanding the entire privacy landscape and the kind of data prevention needs that will have to be imbued in every single organization. Cost and speed to market, innovation. Obviously, we need remarkable pinch hitters. Fine, using the analogy from cricketing. Impact players. Just imagine, suddenly, out of nowhere, we have a bunch of very senior people trying to dredge Byju's out of the morass that they are in. Mohandas Pai, a former SEBI director, so on and so forth. These are all pinch hitters. Suddenly, in today's context, you really need those pinch hitters, especially in areas like what Byju's is going through, or tomorrow if there is a cyber event. Whoever expected a HDFC Bank, a Kotak Bank, and a Mahindra Finance to be pulled up for certain challenges that they have in the technology space? So one of the reasons why I would compliment CFO Bridge for having taken the plunge to start CTO Bridge is, earlier, for most businesses, technology was only an enabler of business. Today, for most businesses, technology is the underlying business. It is the business. Find your platform for differentiation can at most times be technology and the insights that you actually get from the data in the organization. So this is going to become even more critical in terms of managing the crisis. Now we are seeing this fractionalism play out everywhere. Just going back to the theme, is fractionalism as a theme an idea whose time has come? India has not seen corporate participation in education in a meaningful fashion in the last 2 decades. Some of the best run educational institutions in India have been funded by corporate houses, right? Whether it's Indian Institute of Science here, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, BITS Pilani, OP Jindal, Kriya. But it is all being funded by one individual historically. But today, collective philanthropy has taken off in a big way. And some of the best known institutions have come from fractional contributions. This is not crowdsourcing. This is just not money. These are individuals who are lending their name, providing their influence, working very closely with the leadership team in terms of shaping those institutions. Whether it's the Indian School of Business, which actually started this momentum in India, or you look at Ashoka, Kriya, more recently Plaksha in Chandigarh, there is a new wave of fractional investments coming into education along with the knowledge and the know-how which is going to shape the institutions of the future. Obviously, there are other models that are also creeping up. I just saw a headline in Mint a few weeks back. But today, people are talking about, hey, look, guys, all of us have a responsibility to build India Inc. Nation building cannot happen in the traditional form Don't leave infrastructure development in the country to the government alone. And it's just not these bonds over a long period of time that's going to give the financial muscle for the government to build these, whether it's REIT, whether it's Invest IT, so on and so forth. You're actually going to see a new form of fractionalism emerge in public-private partnership and contribution. Probably have 2 more slides and I should be done. There is a study that we did about a year and a half back, given that the major part of the audience happens to be CFOs. I thought I'll pick this example to dive a little deeply. This is a study that was done jointly with Dun & Bradstreet in India, given that these guys have had a long focus on CFOs, not just in India, but also globally. And as many of you know, CRIA merged with what was erstwhile IFMR, Institute for Financial Management and Research, that was created by Vagul, Seshai, and others over the last several decades. And it has a certain reputation for finance and finance-related study, almost to a point that the current chief economic advisor to the government of India is a former dean of IFMR. So this is actually a study on the future of CFOs and the kind of roles and capabilities that are needed, roles that they would play and the capabilities that are needed. We actually spoke to about 50 to 70 CFOs across industries to understand a few things. Many of this would probably be very simple for you. And nevertheless, I am going ahead and making a point. Historically, these are considered to be the roles of a CFO. But as an educational institution which offers MBA in finance, you know the intent of the study. Fine. What are the capabilities that chartered accountants bring to the table vis-a-vis MBA finance bringing to the table? That there is an element of vested interest in doing the study. And people realize that, hey, look, these are the roles that the traditional chartered accountants would play and fulfill exceptionally well. I'm using CAs and MBA finance more as a proxy for capabilities. It's not to do with the actual qualification, but there is some underlying merit in using this argument today. I'll come to that in a minute. Today, in the new role of a CFO, he or she is expected to be a co-pilot to the CEO. Completely business oriented, and this becomes even more important in the context of ESG. Because ESG is just not reporting what you do. ESG is ensuring that every process, every artifact that you build is ESG compliant. Every vendor, every supplier that you deal with is ESG component, which means it's reimagining every single aspect of the organization, from procurement to warehousing to distribution to customers, to production, to marketing. Every single aspect of what you do will have to be ESG compliant. Especially if you're going to focus on Europe as a market, you had it. Fine. So one, how does a CFO reimagine every single aspect of the business and is truly a trusted lieutenant of the CEO? CFOs have to be storytellers. I had the privilege of running investor relations at Cognizant for almost about 22 years, ever since the company was taken public. So, right from filing the red herring prospectus to meeting up with hundreds to thousands of investors in a given year. I can tell you, dealing with investors is an art. And I've had the experience of being on panels with several CFOs. Some love to do it, some don't love to do it. They believe it's a necessary evil, and therefore they just go through the process. And this makes a huge difference to an organization. Being a technology champion, a people manager, and a risk manager. Now, a study was done globally. This is something that gets published in the Fortune magazine every year to find out how many CFOs in the NASDAQ, in the S&P 500, in the NASDAQ 500 or Fortune 500 are chartered accountants or chartered accountant equivalent CPAs. How many of them are MBA finance? It's interesting, a few years back, the scales actually tipped in favor of MBA finance, that today more than 51% of CFOs in the S&P 500 are MBA finance. And one of the theses that was brought out is people with an MBA finance seem to have some of these newer capabilities. relative to the traditional chartered accountants. We did the same exercise for the Indian CFOs looking at the BSE 500. And the results weren't very different, although it wasn't as acute as it was in the US. But we are beginning to see a trend where more and more are moving towards. It's largely because they believe that MBA finance has exposure all to the newer areas that I just spoke about. People management, risk management, marketing, communication and collaboration, so on and so forth, which is just part of the syllabi, part of the curriculum of any of these MBA programs, and they are created as well-rounded individuals rather than merely be seen as a traditional bean counter, okay, if you will. So the reason why I brought this up is, now this is going to probably change the landscape even more. Tomorrow when you are going to probably play the role of a fractional CFO or a fractional CTO, you are going to probably see a lot more capabilities expected of individuals in some of the newer areas than some of the traditional areas. Many of the smaller companies today, some of the ones that we work with, we are prospecting with 2 or 3 listed companies as we speak, and their entire investor relations is actually outsourced to one of the consulting firms, one of the large consulting firms. They don't probably have an in-house team driving it, which is also the reason why. In fact, yesterday somebody forwarded me an email of a new CFO at WNS. I just went quickly and then checked on his credentials. He happens to be an MBA finance. In fact, in the entire history of Cognizant, up until Jatin Dalal joining the company from Wipro, we never had a CPA as a CFO. Gordon Coburn was an MBA finance from Tuck School at Dartmouth. Karen McLaughlin was an MBA finance from Columbia. And more recently, a gentleman called Jan, he is actually a PhD in economics. Obviously, you don't have the same controls that you have in India as to who could potentially become a CFO. In the Western markets, some of the educational qualifications can be a little more flexible. It's not the qualification per se, I just wanted to use that as a proxy to demonstrate the kind of skills and capabilities that are needed in individuals to be successful. In fact, I'm a very firm believer that your educational qualification is only a passport to your first job. Fine, today, if Accenture as a company can be run by a lawyer, if the Reserve Bank of India can be run by a master's in history, and if Salesforce in India can be run by a lady who has done her master's in English literature, I think anybody can do any job as long as you specialize in that. Fine, it's the experience that actually makes the individuals different. And this fractional stuff is actually catching on way beyond the traditional CFO. You actually have a very material movement in the US, GigX, where you look at how many job roles are being advertised for fractional CXOs. I was very surprised that the current open positions for fractional CXOs is 4,177 just on this one site in the US. So it clearly indicates not only has a time come, I think it's very important for people to start looking at this. I won't spend too much time on this because it's already been covered by a few of them. In fact, scope of work was examined in a very detailed fashion in the previous session. There is one final slide. I think we are at a cusp where fractional CFOs are going to play a very important role in India becoming what the current government talks about, Viksit Bharat by 2047, so on and so forth. Or a $5 trillion economy, $10 trillion economy, so on and so forth, because large companies are going to drive growth only up to a certain level. The entire growth engine is the small and medium enterprises. And if we cannot enable these small and medium enterprises at an appropriate stage, I think all the ambitions of an agent could potentially get mortgaged. I had an opportunity to listen to N. Chandra, the current chairman of Tata Sons, at a United Way event in Chennai last year. He made a very interesting observation. He said, the average employment in an MSME in India is less than 2 people. Just imagine if every one of these institutions can probably be enabled to gain scale. This is where we can make a meaningful difference, individually as well as collectively, to the nation. Some 100,000 startups have come about, each one having amazing potential to take the country to a very different level. 1.2 crore MSMEs, registered MSMEs, not the ones that are outside the registered network, They employ about 9.3 people. If only we can get every one of them to add even 10 more people per organization, I think we have made a huge impact in the growth of these companies. Third, last year, the credit growth to MSMEs have actually gone up substantially because of several initiatives with the government. Fine, whether it's a PLI scheme or whether it's the emergency credit loan guarantee scheme. We are actually seeing remarkable growth in MSMEs in the country. And the appetite for a new generation of people graduating from colleges to become entrepreneurs is far greater even than what it was 2 years or 3 years back. Number of students straight from college, fine, or people with 3 to 5 years of experience under their belt, fine, their preference is not to go take up an employment, but to create employment in the market. And I don't think we need to be ashamed of being seen as India as a nation of shopkeepers. And if we don't do it, I think we are actually missing out on our obligation to shape India Inc. in the months and years to come. And I think we would need fractional CXOs in every single discipline. It's just cannot be limited. I know of people who run fractional CMO organizations, fractional CDO organizations, fractional CAO administration organizations, so on and so forth. I think there's a critical need of the hour, if we have to probably take India to the next level. Leave you with one quote, because change is very, very difficult. Fine enough, companies, small, big, are going to resist change. In fact, while we are all talking about SMEs here, I don't know whom Kotak Bank is going to identify to bail them out of the crisis that they are in currently. And get what? Vaswani, who took over as a CEO, he was formerly called the digital evangelist of Barclays. Find the technology issue that Kotak is going through today. Hopefully he'll manage it. He has just taken over as a CEO just in the last few weeks. So I think that's the level of intervention that is needed. Said by a former military chief of staff in the United States that if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less.